Fellow Lobsters, as you know, I've been one of Jordan Peterson's staunchest critics. But after reading about how staff at Penguin Random House Canada threw themselves into a tizzy about the decision to go ahead with the release of the professor's new book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, I have finally seen the light. I refer to the article by Vice World News, which reported how 4 Penguin employees cried, expressed dismay, and cited their concerns about platforming someone who is popular in far-right circles. One worker had the gall to complain that Peterson is an icon of hate speech and transphobia and white supremacy, whereas another woke-flake grumbled that he's responsible for radicalizing and causing a surge of alt-right groups, especially on university campuses. Clearly, these claims are preposterous, a collective lashing out by disgruntled social justice warriors who likely have what nearly all of you, Lobsters, do not: an education, a sense of ethics, and a civic responsibility to defend the oppressed and protect democracy. But we Lobsters, we know the truth. We have set our house in perfect order and are now ready to criticize the world. We have cleaned our rooms and tidied up our sock drawers. We have read, or pretend to have read, 12 Rules for Life, and we have seen the enemy, and it is the left. It's the liberal media, like the CBC, who dared question JP about why he signaled to incels and the far right with hate symbols, and like British GQ, who dared question JP about why he signaled to incels and the far right with hate symbols. My arthropods in arms, do you see the parallelism? This is a conspiracy. Okay, sure, Peterson has said that the alt-right project is benevolent and incomplete, but he was just doing what the radical leftists do to him. He was taking himself out of context. The enemy includes liberal universities, whose olive-clad, hammer-and-sickle-loving professors promote knowledge-based education, critical thinking, social equality, and even plurality through such malicious schemes as postmodernism, a mode of thought that is plainly non-Petersonian and therefore heretical. I mean really, postmodernists would have us believe that there's a multiplicity of ways of doing, being, and thinking. But, as JP has adroitly pointed out, who decides which way is correct? Who, as George W. Bush might say, is the decider? Obviously, it's the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy, and as Peterson has dictated, this individual needs to be a messianic figure and a psychopathic leader who represents blunt power so the hierarchy can remain stable across eons. By stable, he meant orderly. Oh, and if those chaotic left-wing do-gooders need to have it spelled out for them, the messianic figure JP has in mind is AH, Adolf Hitler. Now, I know, Lobsters, some of us like to pretend in front of the lefties that this isn't true, but come on, we know it is, because our guru is forever reminding us that the Germans viewed the Fuhrer as a savior, which is true, but we can speculate that Peterson also views him this way, because he has called Hitler brilliant, a genius, a war hero, and unbelievably good at everything from economics to art. He has also said, it's like the elevation of the person at the top of the dominance hierarchy to the status of some kind of quasi-deity. It certainly happened in Hitler's case. Along with, Hitler climbed up the ranks of the hierarchy in a remarkable manner. And there we have it. AH is the quasi-deity, savior, messianic figure, or God at the top of our DH, or dominance hierarchy, in which there must be order. In Hitler Speaks, by Hermann Rauschning, Hitler is on record as saying, an order, that is what our party has to be, the hierarchical order of a secular priesthood. I will tell you a secret. I am founding an order. There will be a great hierarchy of party members. Obviously, Peterson's orderly hierarchy, a metaphor for the ideal state, in which order confronts chaos and chaos is transformed into order, cannot be a place of equality. Rather, it's where members of society get dominated. For instance, chaotic types, or even orderly types who trundle about the pyramid scheme's base. And we know who that is, don't we, Lobsters? As JP has explained, I like to use lobsters as examples, he means as a metaphor, because lobsters arrange themselves into dominance hierarchies and have very complex social behavior. They don't have much of a brain. You can have pretty damned complex social behavior without having much of a brain. Hey, Lobsters, he's talking about us, and he's right. Our brains are about the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen. Let's face it, crustaceans, we're incapable of thinking for ourselves. We need a leader to think for us, and as that leader has decreed. There's very few stars in the Milky Way that have most of the matter, and Society resembles that of the Milky Way. Among countless pale stars, a few suns radiate. Exactly. Some stars are naturally brighter than others. And as Peterson reminds us, he's a smart person with an IQ in excess of 150, whereas we don't have much of a brain. As for the snowflake claim that Peterson is an icon of transphobia, good grief, what these sissies want to do is create chaos. It's as if they've taken their direction from the song Lola by the Kinks, you know? But no self-respecting arthropod wants to live in a mixed-up, muddled-up, shook-up world. We want to get our lives in order and eliminate chaos with an antidote. Or, as our lobster god says, if our value structure is aimed at the betterment of being, the meaning reveal will be life-sustaining. It will provide the antidote for the chaos and suffering. We can and must reduce the suffering that poisons the world. Such a movement as ours can only eradicate poison with a poisonous antidote. A brief aside on Peterson's being, capitalized. He says he got the word from Martin Heidegger's Being in Time. He has defended Heidegger for being a Nazi, saying that the German professor and philosopher merely got tangled up in National Socialism. What our guru cleverly omitted, remember his high IQ, was that Heidegger was an enthusiastic supporter of Hitler. He paid his party dues from 1933 to 1945 and refused to apologize for his beliefs after the war. In 1933, as the rector of Freiburg University, he made pro-Hitler speeches to his students. For example, let not propositions and ideas be the rules of your being. The Führer alone is the present and future German reality and its law. Learn to know ever more deeply that from now on, every single thing demands decision, and every action responsibility. Hail Hitler! If you watch the beginning of a Peterson video where you hear Mozart's Symphony 41, the third movement, and see fragments of his Maps of Meaning icon congeal, you can spot a photo of Heidegger on the right and a picture of Jewish children in a concentration camp on the left. And Peterson, our father figure, writes in 12 Rules that he has the capacity to act like a Nazi prison guard or torturer of children in a dungeon. In the same sentence, Peterson admits he could brutalize Jews in a death camp and torture children. And his videos often begin with an image of children in a death camp alongside a picture of a Nazi, who Peterson likes and defends, for having been a Nazi. Heidegger publicly stumped for Hitler, criticized professors who failed to support Hitler, openly discriminated against Jewish students, and, after the war, denied that he and other innocents had any knowledge of the Holocaust. For example, when he said, "The bloody terror of the Nazis," remember, he was a Nazi, was in fact kept a secret from the German people. You see, Heidegger just got tangled up in Nazism. As for Mozart, the composer was used by the Nazis as propaganda. Non-lobsters can read about this in Eric Levy's Mozart and the Nazis, How the Third Reich Abused a Cultural Icon. I wonder why Peterson chose Symphony 41's third movement. Why the third? Anyway, returning to the gender benders, as JP has so thoughtfully called members of the LGBTQ+ community, those second-class citizens should not be allowed to decide for themselves how to identify because they are not at the top of the dominance hierarchy. I mean, did they climb the ranks in a remarkable manner and become quasi-deities? As Peterson says, they're merely a sideshow. And as he has told his supporters, the transgender agenda subjugates the natural family. Peterson has called his own family a bastion of order. He's always going on about the marvels of Hitler's order. Oh, and look, here's a picture of Jordan Peterson's wife, Tammy, holding what Peterson has called Hitler the Frog. A bastion of order, indeed. To help prevent the loony left from bending the fabric of Heideggerian being, perhaps Rule 1 of the third volume in the 12 Rules series could be, "A man is a man, and so is a woman." It's an easy slogan for us lobsters, to remember, and it emphasizes the importance of biology. Speaking of which, are we just going to sit here at the base of the dominance hierarchy, staring at one another as the transgender agenda dismantles science, including evolutionary biology and natural selection? In 12 Rules, Peterson explains how natural selection is essential for hierarchical integrity. That's why he mentions the process of natural selection, the breeding of the fittest, and says, nature selects. The idea of selects contains within it the idea of fitness. Honestly, what is with the radical leftists' disdain for science and their obsession with legal protection for vulnerable groups? As Peterson would say, it's reprehensible and appalling and reprehensible. Have the gender benders not heard him say that empathy is for 2-year-olds? Has that sideshow not listened to his sagacious denigration of human rights? At the University of Toronto, Professor Peterson made it clear that human rights were overrated when he said to his students, who had plainly been contaminated by Bolshevik ideology, that it was sad that they were always carping about rights, 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 rights. Jesus, he said, it's appalling. Indeed, human rights are bound up with democracy, and as our leader has ordained, the purpose of liberal education is not to turn you into an avatar of democracy, and freedom isn't the sort of thing that makes people happy, it's the sort of thing that makes people troublesome. Think of what the troublesome democracies did to Hitler's Third Reich, which Peterson has said was designed to rule for 1,000 years and be a bastion of civilization and music. Hitler once referred to a bastion reaching far into the Reich. But back to how democracy makes people troublesome. Did Socrates not drink the hemlock lobsters? Did he not deserve to? Peterson, who includes a sketch of the painting The Death of Socrates in 12 Rules, tells us that Socrates' disposition toward his judges was impetuous. Thus we can understand precisely why the town council wanted this man dead, and can take comfort in his demise. Unfortunately, democracy made a comeback, receiving a real boost during the Enlightenment, which Peterson has acidly described as nothing. That bloody Voltaire. Mon Dieu, I hate those French intellectuals almost as much as Peterson does, although he reserves his disdain for Michel Foucault, whose homosexuality he has called peculiar, and Jacques Derrida, who was Jewish and expelled from school due to anti-Semitic quotas imposed by the Vichy regime. To the CBC's Wendy Mesley, Jordan Peterson said, "Rights aren't as useful with regards to establishing what's meaningful in your life as responsibility." Ah yes, responsibility. Remember Heidegger telling his students, "From now on, every single thing demands decision, and every action, responsibility." Heil Hitler! To be sure, the Lobster-Aryan faith is predicated on the responsibility borne by the individual. Hence why Peterson says, "Nothing can take the place of the individual," and "I came to a more complete personal realization of what the great stories of the past continually insist upon. The center is occupied by the individual." Again, the individual should swap human rights for responsibility. This is why Peterson tells us to bear the weight of our true responsibility and proceed as sole bearer of responsibility. And it's the reason he frowns on the cowardice which leads to the shirking of every kind of responsibility, and encourages us to aim small. You don't want to shoulder too much to begin with, given your ability to shirk responsibility. He has also told us, "The man who has not the courage to shoulder responsibility is not fit to be a leader," and asks, "Are you truly shouldering your responsibilities?" In addition to shouldering responsibilities, the individual lobster must make sacrifices. Peterson says, "We are obligated to make sacrifices voluntarily, because Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily." JP encourages the willingness of the individual to make sacrifices for the community, stressing that the willingness of the individual to stand up for him or herself protects everyone from the corruption of society. As a member of the community, or collective, individual lobsters must oppose other collectives, for example, the communist left, who receive their marching orders from Marxist thinkers like Jacques Derrida, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Karl Marx himself, all of whom were Jewish. As Peterson warns, ordinary Russians were not fired to communist revolutionary enthusiasm by reading the theories of Karl Marx, but by promises of paradise made by agitators in the service of an idea. It is just typical of our intellectuals. And communism was attractive not so much to oppressed workers, its hypothetical beneficiaries, but to intellectuals. Sorry, as you may have gathered, I've played a bit of a trick on you. I haven't really become a Lobsterarian because I wouldn't affiliate with a group whose members have sent death threats to female journalists, or who write pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic comments under Peterson's YouTube videos. Moreover, Peterson really didn't make these statements which you've seen and heard, the ones written in black. I refer to the quotes now on your screen. Feel free to pause the video and examine them. They were made by Hitler. But then, you knew that, right, lobsters? There's no fooling you. I mean, lobsters never take the bait and get caught in traps, and your loyalty prevents you from being dominated by the psychopathic leader at the top of the dominance hierarchy, correct? Actually, I probably just fooled you again. These quotes really do come from Peterson. Or do they? Come on, lobsters. You're always telling me that the idea of Jordan Peterson plagiarizing Adolf Hitler is absurd. So, if it's absurd, who made these statements? Peterson or Hitler? I'll give you some help. Half are from Peterson and half Hitler. To work out who said what, I recommend you read The Devil in His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler, wherein I document over 3,100 instances of Peterson copying Hitler. But if you're a lobster, I know you'll deny, explain away, and avoid the evidence, and attack me like you attack everyone who criticizes your spiritual advisor. You took the bait and are in his trap. As he tells you in 12 Rules, just after quoting a passage from Mein Kampf, in which Hitler says, "Primitive people will never believe you are telling the big lie. For the big lie, you need the little lie. The little lie is the bait used by the father of lies to hook his victims." The father of lies is Hitler, who banged on about the evils of Jew-ridden universities and equated parliamentary democracy to Leninism. The Democrats, he said, were opposed to free speech because they were trying to shut his movement down. Liberal education was corrupting children and preventing them from becoming courageous individuals who could shoulder responsibility and make sacrifices for his hierarchy by establishing order. That is, Nazism, and confronting chaos, the word he used to describe the Jews and other Untermenschen. These were some of Hitler's little lies. The big lie was, elevate me to the status of messianic figure. As Hitler said, I endured crucifixion on pitiless Calvary, and I will solve the problem. And we know which problem, that of Jacques Derrida, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and millions of others. Jordan Peterson is a crypto-fascist who uses the self-help genre as camouflage. As some staffers at Penguin Random House Canada have noted, he isn't helping people, he's indoctrinating them into an ideology of hate. His enemies, women, educators, journalists, Democrats, liberals, lawmakers, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and Jewish intellectuals, were Hitler's enemies and have become his lobsters' enemies. But for the barmy lobster army, Peterson's little lies equate to a grand unified truth. Mind you, Peterson occasionally tells the truth, like when he says lobsters are quote-unquote primitive, like the quote-unquote primitive people tricked by Hitler. Oh, and Peterson is a tough guy who never cries like those snowflakes. Well, alright, he's crying in this image. And this one. And here. And here. And here. The Devil in His Due, How Jordan Peterson Plagiarizes Adolf Hitler, should be available in January 2021. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe.